They called it the Queen of Hurricanes. Hurricane Katrina wasn't just another storm. It was a disaster that rewrote history, destroyed a city, and left scars that remain to this day. Most people know the basics. New Orleans flooded, thousands died, and billions were lost. But here is the truth. There is a lot about Katrina that most people have never heard of. And today, we're diving into the facts, the mysteries, and the hidden side of one of the most infamous hurricanes in history. First, let's start with the name. Katrina sounds almost calm, almost gentle. But behind that name was one of the most destructive storms to ever hit the United States. Katrina formed in late August 2005, beginning as a tropical depression over the Bahamas. It was small at first, weak, almost forgettable. But within days, it exploded into a monster storm, fueled by the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Now here is something surprising. Katrina was not a Category 5 storm when it made landfall in New Orleans. In fact, by the time it hit, it had weakened to a Category 3 hurricane. Most people assumed the storm's winds were what destroyed the city. But the real danger wasn't the wind, it was the water. Katrina pushed an enormous storm surge into the Gulf Coast, with walls of water over 28 feet high in Mississippi. That's taller than a two-story house being swallowed whole in seconds. But here's the shocking part. New Orleans didn't flood because Katrina was unstoppable. It flooded because human systems failed. The levees, those giant walls designed to protect the city, collapsed in more than 50 locations. Some cracked, some were overtopped, others simply gave way under the pressure. Investigations later revealed many of the levees weren't even properly engineered. In other words, this wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a man-made one. When the levees failed, about 80% of New Orleans was underwater. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath toxic floodwaters, and those waters didn't drain away quickly. They stayed for weeks, turning parts of the city into a swamp of destruction. Imagine watching your house sink into black water, your photos, your memories, your entire life gone in a single night. That was the reality for hundreds of thousands of people. Katrina became the largest forced migration in U.S. history since the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Over 1 million people were displaced. Families were scattered across the country. Some never came back. Even today, nearly 2 decades later, the population of New Orleans has never fully returned to what it was before the storm. But here's where the story gets darker. Relief didn't come quickly. In fact, it took 5 days before large-scale federal help arrived. During that time, thousands of survivors were stranded inside the Superdome and the Convention Center. No electricity, no clean water, barely any food, heat, filth, and chaos. The images shocked the world. People trapped in desperate conditions in the heart of one of the richest countries on Earth. It was a global embarrassment, and it raised a painful question. How could this happen in America? And then there's the issue of inequality. Katrina exposed deep cracks in society. The hardest-hit communities were often the poorest, and disproportionately African American. Wealthier neighborhoods had more resources to escape and rebuild. But for many, especially those without cars or money, evacuation was simply impossible. They were left behind, abandoned as the waters rose. Katrina wasn't just a storm. It was a magnifying glass showing the ugly truth about poverty and race in America. The damage was almost unimaginable. $125 billion in destruction. Whole industries wiped out. Oil rigs in the Gulf shut down. Insurance premiums skyrocketed worldwide. Think about that. Even if you lived thousands of miles away, Katrina might have raised your insurance costs. The financial ripple was global. But let's talk about survival. Amid the tragedy, there were incredible stories of resilience. Neighbors rescuing neighbors in boats. Strangers sharing food and shelter. Ordinary people becoming heroes while official systems failed. In the weeks after the storm, volunteer groups like the Cajun Navy, ordinary citizens with fishing boats, saved thousands of lives. Katrina also changed the way America prepares for disasters. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, faced massive criticism for its slow response. The government rewrote emergency plans. Cities across the world studied Katrina, realizing that climate change means bigger, stronger storms are becoming the new normal. Katrina wasn't just history, it was a warning. But here's a fact most people don't know. Even today, parts of New Orleans remain vulnerable. Billions were spent on repairing and upgrading the levee system, but experts warn that with rising sea levels and stronger hurricanes, another Katrina-level disaster is not only possible, it's likely. The queen of hurricanes may be gone, but her shadow lingers. So what did Katrina teach us? That nature is powerful, yes, but human failure can make a bad situation catastrophic. That disasters don't strike equally. Some communities bear the weight far more heavily than others. And that resilience, courage, and human connection matter most when systems collapse. Hurricane Katrina wasn't just a storm, it was a mirror, showing us who we are, how we fail, and how we rise again. Nearly 2 decades later, the lessons are still here, staring us in the face. The only question is, are we ready to listen? Because the Queen of Hurricanes was more than a storm, she was a warning, and the next one might not give us a second chance.